he like he said, he's the man. He's the man. Have you laughing. So thank you for the honor of having me come back. Apparently, he feels I have something to say. So thank you again, and seeing familiar faces again, and thank you for having my back, because some person lost the card to the pictures. Yeah, picture guy there. So, but again, thank you. And yeah, we're here to celebrate Black History Month. And I was thinking about, I have 4 children, and I have 7 grandchildren, and I have 1 great-grandbaby. So I have a legacy that I want to leave to my children and to my grandchildren and to my great-grandchildren, to be proud of who they are. And there's my mother would sing this song, lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring, ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun, a new day has begun. Let us march on till victory is won. That's the Black National Anthem. Has a great meaning. Thank you. It talks about the roads of turmoil and hurt and pain that African Americans suffered. It talks about the stony road that they trod. It talks about the unborn that never had a chance to come forth. It talked about years and tears that had been watered. So many in the blood had been slaughtered. But still we rise to be a great people. And I always tell my children, do you know what Black History Month is? And so if you ask my children, they can tell you. It's just like me telling them, do you know the Pledge of Allegiance? And I know that young people, I work at Whitworth University, and some of them, you know, if you sing it, I said, do you sing the Pledge of Allegiance? They like, can you recite it? And it's amazing how some of our kids don't even know the Pledge of Allegiance or the Star Spangled Banner. Those are things that I think everyone as an American should know. So I told my children, do you know the origins of Black History Month? And so this is like an educational aha moment. The origins of Black History Month lay in the early 20th century historian Carter G. Woodson. And his desire was to spotlight the accomplishments of African Americans. Mainstream historians left out African Americans from the narrative of American history until the 1960s. I remember growing up in a school, and when we went, there was nothing about us but slavery. And I was very inquisitive as a kid. And I told my parents, is that all we were? Slaves? And my mother began to go into her room and pull off these shelves, these books. And it opened up my eyes of the great legacy of my people. And I tell everybody has a culture. Everybody has a history. And we should know. You may come from Sweden. Your family may come from Germany. We all have a history. And I think that as adults, we need to teach our children and our grandchildren about their history. And so he wanted people to know that we had a legacy. So in 1915, Woodson helped found the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History. And the idea for the organization was devoted to Black history, and it came to Woodson as he was discussing the release of the racist film, The Birth of a Nation. If you've never watched The Birth of a Nation, I think it's one of the most horrific, horrible movies that depicts people of color. And it reminds me that as a woman of color, I want my children to see themselves as wonderful, smart, intelligent, not something to be put underfoot, but to be proud of the skin that they're in. To be proud, yes, your ancestors were slaves. And I'm going to read a couple of poems that kind of depicts how I want my children to look at themselves. The organization began publishing its first flagship journal, the Journal of Negro History, in 1916. Woodson came up with a plan for a week of activities and commemorations devoted to African American history. Woodson chose the week of February the 7th, 1926, so the first, and at that time was called the Negro History Week because it included the birthdays of both Abraham Lincoln, and his birthday was on February 12th, celebrated the Emancipation Proclamation, freed many American slaves and abolitionists, and former slave Frederick Douglass, whose birthday is on February 14th. And through this, Woodson hoped that this History Week would encourage better relations between blacks and whites in the United States, as well as inspiring young African Americans to celebrate their accomplishments and the contributions of their ancestors. Thanks to this History Week, the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History began to receive requests for more accessible articles. As a result, in 1937, the organization began publishing the Negro History Bulletin, which is aimed at African-American teachers who wanted to incorporate black history in their lessons. And that's one of the things that I found out when I started school. I would ask teachers, do you know about my history? And someone would say, oh, no, that's not important. So for a long time, I didn't think I was important. I thought, okay, what's important to you? And I found out what was important to them, and I found out what that was important to them, it wasn't important to me. Because if you don't want me to be in a part of your world, how can we say that we are a nation of many colors? A nation of diversity. I think that's what makes us so great, that we come from all parts of the world, and we come together to be united as one. So Black History Month, African Americans quickly took up Negro History Week, and by the 1960s, at the height of the Civil Rights Movement, American educators, both white and black, were observing Black History Week. At the same time, mainstream historians have begun to expand the American historical narrative to include African Americans as well as women. Yes, we were there, we're still here, and we're not going anywhere. Oh, thank you. And in the U.S., celebrating the bicentennial, there were so many things of week-long celebrations of African American history. And the same year, President Gerald Ford urged Americans to observe Black History Month. But it was President Carter who officially recognized Black History Month in 1978. With the federal government's blessings, Black History Month became a regular event in American schools, and by the opening decade of the 21st century, however, some were questioning whether Black History Month should be continued, especially after the election of the first African American president, President Obama. Because in 2008, for instance, in a 2009 article, some people suggested that Black History Month had become a stale month. And I thought, how ironic. But others began to argue that they needed that and that we needed Black History Month, and it should not and will not disappear. Woodson would no doubt be pleased by the expansion of the original Negro History Week. His goal in celebrating Negro History Week was to highlight African Americans' accomplishments alongside white American accomplishments. Woodson asserted the story of the Negro retold, that the book is not so much that of the Negro history as it is universal history. So for Woodson, Negro History Week was about teaching the contributions of all Americans and correcting a national historical narrative that he felt was little more than racist propaganda. So we celebrate Black History Month. And I want to, if you've ever heard of Langston Hughes, and I'm a poet, don't you know it? Y'all found that out the last time I was here. And he wrote a poem, and it was called I Too. He says, I too sing America. I am the darker brother. They send me to eat in the kitchen when company comes, but I laugh and I eat well and I grow strong. Tomorrow I'll be at the table when company comes. Nobody will dare say to me, eat in the kitchen then. Besides, they'll see how beautiful I am and be ashamed because I too am America. And he wrote that out of pain by working as a butler in a kitchen. And you know, as the help, you would eat in the kitchen. And then he said, I too should be able to sit at the table with others, because he said, I too am America. Maya Angelou wrote a poem during Black History Month, and it's called A Pledge to Rescue Our Youth. And she wanted to know and let young people of color know how important they were. And so she says, young women, young men of color, we add our voices to the voices of your ancestors who speak to you over ancient seas and across impossible mountaintops. Come up from the gloom of national neglect. You have already been paid for. For you see, come out of the shadow of irrational prejudice. You owe no racial debt to history. The blood of our bodies and the prayers of our souls have brought you a future, free from shame and bright beyond the telling of it. We pledge ourselves and our resources to seek for you clean and well-furnished schools, safe and non-threatening streets, employment which makes use of your talents but does not degrade your dignity. You are the best we have. You are all we have. You are what we have become. We pledge our whole hearts from this day forward. And she was letting them know how important they were and what a contribution they should have and give to the struggle of Black people. I wanted to read something to you on why we should celebrate Black history. And the reason I say this is because when people tell me that Black history isn't important, you're telling my children that they are not important. You're telling my grandchildren that they are not important. It's telling my grandchildren that they are not important. And if I don't educate them about Black History Month, I'm telling them that they are not important. So it is my responsibility as a woman of color to say, let's celebrate who we are. Each one of you have some type of culture or ancestry in you. You have come from somewhere. We were not all born in America, per se, our ancestors. Jackie said she's from Hawaii. What ancestry is somebody give me some feedback. Where are you from? Where are your ancestors from?
Germany.
Ireland. Oh. Germany.
Italy.
Anybody else? Mexico. Salamapo. Well, a lot. I know how to say how much in a minute. I lived there for 5 years. One of my favorite. I'll compete with you with Ponzit. I can make a bad thing of Ponzit. Don't mess with me with lumpia. I can do it. Anybody else? Azores. Look at the culture that we have in this room. We should be so very. I work at Whitworth University, and they just celebrated Hispanic Month, or they're getting ready to. I think it's next, isn't it March? Yeah. You ought to see the stuff that my kids are doing. We partying. You got the sombreros. Our girls are in full regalia with their clothes because we want them to know how important they are. So here's one reason. Celebrating Black History Month honors the historic leaders of our Black community. Medgar Evers, James Meredith. When I think of these people, celebrating heroes, as Trey said, gave their lives for their countries. Celebrating the honors, the historic leaders of our Black community. Number two, celebrating helps us to be better stewards of the privilege we've gained. I told my children, when you tell me you don't want to go to school, oh yeah, you're going to go to school. You're going to go get an education. If you don't get an education, you'll get a trade. Why? Because your ancestors paid for you to have the privilege to go to school. Number 3, celebrating provides an opportunity to highlight the best of Black history and culture. I tell my children, it's always not about pop culture on TV. Let's go to the library. Let's go to some museums. One of my plans is to take my grandchildren to Washington, D.C. They are so excited, like, oh, we can't wait. I want them to see the history, the richness, and the culture of who they are. Number 4, celebrating creates awareness for all people. I love teaching diversity, equity, and inclusion. I love teaching cultural competence and cultural sensitivity, and that's across the board, just not as a woman of color, but I think all of us should have a respect for one another. Number 5, celebrating reminds us that all Black history is our history. When I think about history, I think of the Hispanics, the Asian, the European, the Native history, because all of us, Black and white, men and women, young and old, we all have a piece of America. So when I sing My Country 'Tis of Thee, I sing it with an honor. My daughter is a veteran. My children's father is a veteran. When I say the Pledge of Allegiance, it means something to me, because I tell my children, your ancestors' blood is in this land. They paid a heavy price, and it's up to you to carry on the legacy of being good stewards, being good citizens, giving back to community through education. What I tell my children, whatever you're going to be the best at it. If you're going to be a garbage man, doggone it, you better be the best garbage man that's on the block. Why? Because you owe it to yourselves, you owe it to your family to be the best. So as we celebrate Black History Month, as a Christian, I celebrate Black history because as a believer, I see racial and ethnic diversity as an expression of God's manifold beauty. No single race or its culture can comprehensively display the infinite glory of God's image. He gave us our differences and this is what he said, to help us appreciate his splendor in us. When I look at this room, yes, I'm a pastor, yes, I'm a Christian, I think of the wonderful array of who we are. If the whole world was Stephanie, I don't think the world can handle her. It'll be too loud, too boisterous, too much. But the splendor of who he has created us to be. His grace that is intertwined in all of us. And when I look at my grandchildren, I come from a multicultural family. My grandchildren's father, I call him my chocolate English muffin. His mother is English, his father is African American. He calls me Mama. And when I look at my grandchildren, I'm like, I have some beautiful grandchildren. From chocolate to vanilla wafers to, I don't know what sister, y'all just think they swirls. My great-grandbaby is half Hispanic, Black, French Creole, and I forget the other part of him, who he is. But I look at him. He's a little boy that's imaginative, and I'm thinking, God, you created that beautiful little boy. So I celebrated. He knows what Black History Month is. I've shown him beautiful pictures, and he's like, wow, Gigi. To show him